There's a matter of control that that we try to put on things. You say when in your normal day when you're doing something and your mind start wandering off someplace, the 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 effort is trying to pull it back to where it is.
Mm-hmm.
And the more you pull it back, is the more it wants to escape. It says if in order to keep an animal close to you, say to keep a pen of horses or whatever else, if you have a pen, they'll eventually escape. But if you don't have a pen, they'll stay close. There's no need for them to go anywhere.
Right.
And it's the same way that when you harvest the mind itself and its thought, you put any kind of control on it, then it's going to try to break out of that control. So
Right.
when the thoughts come, you don't say, "Oh my gosh, I'm thinking about something. I need to change back and think about this." Let the mind wander. Let it wander because it only could wander so far. You know, it's this may sound strange, but it's the same thing that I said to you before. You could only go east so far, then you're going west.
Right.
So the mind could only wander so far, then it has to curve and come back. So you don't try to harvest it, you don't try to control it. You allow it to, wrong word, but it just goes.
It's just a
Just
journey.
let it
Yeah.
go. Yeah. If there's a front door, there should always be a back door.
Right.
Allow it to pass through. And that gives you the free flowing thought, which in terms will also give you a free flowing breath or chi or air as you're going through your body. Like what um, Linda was trying to ask about was reverse breath or reverse breathing.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Now, that type of breathing mechanism, what happens is that you're forcing everything to go to go backwards, and then you're trying to take control over it,
Mm-hmm.
which is something that you could do, but it requires so much effort.
Right.
As a Taoist, you don't want to do anything that requires effort. You know, you want to make sure that everything is flowing as in a natural way. You should
Mhm.
always feel that you're not doing anything. You know, like at the end at the end of the day, when you sit back before you get ready to go slumber, you want to sit back and think, "Oh my God, what did I do today?" And physically, I mean, mentally, not have the memory of that at all. Because if you sit back and you start thinking and you start tallying all the things, you realize you've done a lot of things in that particular day.
Mhm.
But if you think of in terms of the lot of things, then you become totally exhausted. But if you think in terms of what did I do today, you still feel comfortable. You feel okay because you don't have the burden of carrying all these things with you.
Right.
They were done, they were over with, and they're gone, and they're gone through, and it was just part of a natural pattern, a natural
Mhm.
flow of things. It was nothing that was required any extra thought or any effort. So when you approach any movements in Tai Chi, in order to, I'm going to use a word that I shouldn't use, accomplish the movement.
Mhm.
What you need first of all, is not even think about the movement.
Right.
Yeah, you stand first, and that's why I had you guys you yesterday just stand for a second
Mhm.
because I wanted you to forget, even just a little bit, just to forget. Because once you forget, then you could start doing it.
Mhm.
Then it becomes more of a recall. I've been this path before, so I know where to go. It's
Mhm.
like if if water flows in an area before and then it dries up and other water comes, it knows exactly where to flow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't. try to jump and take a new path. It says, this is where I've been before. This is where I'm going to go.
Right.
And it will continue along that path. No matter how much we try to change it and alter it, it knows what is natural.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually it'll flow back in its natural path. When you pick up the sword to use, if you considered, okay, now I'm picking up the sword and I'm going to use it, then it becomes something which is unnatural.
Mm-hmm.
It's like when Linda said to me yesterday, um, it feels like I need a sword in my hand now to do the movement. Um, to think of it that way, then it becomes an outside entity that you have to pick up and incorporate.
Right.
So the thing is not to think of it that way. Whether your hands are empty, you perceive your hands as being empty or being full, it's still used exactly the same way.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's like an English concept. You use the word pessimist and optimist. You know, is the glass half empty or half full?
Mm-hmm.
And as a Taoist, I know it's always full. It can never be empty.
Right.
So my hand is perceived without a sword, but I still have the sword in my hand.
Right.
Although if you look at it and you say, Franklin, there's nothing in your hand. Absolutely. Nothing equates to something. Because if there's a thought of the sword or the feeling of the sword or whatever else is connected to me, it's still in my hand. I could
Right.
still move the same way, with or without it, depending on who's perceiving it at that particular time.
Mm-hmm.
So when you actually see me pick up the object and move it to one side, in my mind, I'm not thinking I'm picking up the object. What I'm doing is continuing something that I've always been doing. Before you do any action, there is a thought that goes before that action, whether consciously or subconsciously. No matter how quickly you think you could move, the thought always perceives that move.
Right.
And it's the thought that is the one that's going to allow that action to happen, because the thought is already the first part of that action. It's the movement of that action. So when you pick up the sword in Tai Chi to move it, there is a thought that perceive that movement. But the thought is not one that you're looking so far ahead that you can't see where you are. The thought is where you are at that moment, not where you were and not where you're going to be, not where you expect to be.
Right.
So it gives you a different kind of a feeling, a different kind of understanding. That way you could pull yourself back together and center yourself in that. And the centering is right down the end of the spine, going into the five main chakras, or the seven chakras inside of you here, to keep that alignment in the body.
Mm-hmm.
And with that alignment, you could move easily through time and space, because now you're balancing within time and space to make the movements to be unobstructive movement. Question?
No, it's funny because the whole chakra center balance is not something that I it's like you don't consciously think about it.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, I sometimes know when I'm doing, like I'm, turning with my shoulders instead of my hips. But
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I only notice it after I do it and something feels off, as opposed to doing it correctly the first time. So it's that sort of feedback of trying to get all that input in I don't know. It's kind of like when we're playing golf, it's like we'll do a shot, they'll go way over that way, and I'll think, gee, I shouldn't have done that. You know, I know exactly what I did wrong after I do it. It's like, why can't you know beforehand in your mind what you're going to do and then do it correctly and then not have to worry about it or not, you know, but it is funny because, yeah, it's just that feedback loop is like, why don't you do it correctly the first time or no, or have that feedback maybe sooner, I guess, rather than after, kind of after the fact, I guess. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Well, if you think about doing it correct the first time,
Mhm.
what's going to happen though? There's going to be a certain amount of resistance to doing it.
Right, right. Okay.
So you're already starting off with a negative. You took 2 steps forward, and now you're taking 3 steps back
Okay.
because you're trying to control a behavior that didn't happen.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And logically, that doesn't make sense. So in order to do it, you don't put any real conscious thought into it, and you allow the mind to have its a free-flowing thought.
Right.
You move into it, and then you just move. You just do it.
Right.
I used to I ran track and field when I was much younger. I was a sprinter,
Uh-huh.
and one of the things that I did, and my coach was always say there, just shake his head at me every time I do it. I would, people would be out in the field stretching and jumping up and down and warming up and doing wind sprints and all this stuff. But I would just lay down somewhere on the line on the grass on my back and just lay there. And he says, "Aren't you gonna stretch and do wind sprints before you get into the heat and start running?" I said, "I'm thinking about it," but I didn't really do it. And then I would get on the line and run, and majority of the time won the race. And he
Mm-hmm.
just kind of shake his head at me because he just figure, something strange about this person because every time he just gets up, he sprints down the thing like a gazelle or
Uh-huh.
like a cheetah, and then he stops at the other end and he sits there and he falls asleep. you know, you know, and never thinking that I need to get up, I need to stretch, I need to get ready, I need to do all of this. Because every time if I do that, I know that there's gonna be a certain amount of resistance to doing it. And
Right.
then I have to try to force an effort into doing it.
Right.
And if I do that, then I won't run freely and then I'm gonna lose that race. It was as simple as that.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah. So when I get up to do my wushu, or if I get up to do um, Tai Chi, like this morning, um, I told my class we're going to do the full set, 1 to 3, 108 complete, no stopping. And I'm sure that some of my students on the other side, they're on Zoom going like this, full set. You got to be kidding. Because a lot of people, what happened is that what they're doing, they start off with the idea of doing the full set. They start thinking about it, and somewhere in the middle, they forget exactly where they are.
Mm.
Because when they get to the pattern where it starts repeating itself before it changes, you're thinking, am I in set 1, 2, or 3 at this point? What's the next move? Oh, this is a transition in this one, but am I in the right set?
Right.
you know, and when they think of it like that, then it becomes very difficult to do the whole set. What you do, you start the form, and you just continue. wherever you are, this is exactly where you are. You don't think about where you were or where you're going, because once you
Mhm.
start thinking about it, where you are becomes a difficult place to be. So when you pick up the sword and you start doing, um, say you learn the Lohan set very easily. That
Mhm.
that wasn't so hard. That's the first set. And
Right.
I watched you do it yesterday, and you did a good performance of the step, although you don't think so. But there's times that you did the set that I could actually see that you forget. And when you forgot, the movement was even better. When you remember, I could see that you start putting some effort, some thought into it as to, that's where the stall's coming as to where I am, what am I doing, where am I going, where was I before?
Mhm.
And that's what brings you the stigma uh, movement in your form. And then
Right.
all of a sudden, you forgot about that and you just move. Then you remember again, and then you start start stigma movements again. So every time you forget, movements were perfect. Every time you remember, movement becomes connected. One from one to two to three,
Mhm.
like that. It becomes a little bit more difficult. But you'll reach at a point that I'm going to ask you to do the form so much times. Every time we meet over and over, you're just going to get up and just go through it. It won't even be a thought. You just go through it.
Right.
Because when you first learn it, you're thinking it in terms of parts and pieces and whatever else. And the more
Exactly.
the more you start doing it, the more you just totally just forget and just do it.
Mhm.
The second form that you're learning, the Heidelberg form, um, that, and I think the fifth one is probably going to be, well, could be a little bit more challenging, because the second one, the Heidelberg, because it's the dragon, the twists and turns in the forms, because you just keep on going around and round. Well, the other form, you go way back and then come way forward and a little bit left, a little bit right, but you come back forward. This
Right.
form, the second form, you're in a smaller area and your movement is just going this way, and a lot of circles and intercepting circles that you're doing at the same time. And
Mhm.
to remember exactly where you are, that's why you have to concentrate on the movement radiating from the hip in every one of these, and then tracking the sword and your movements using the eyes,
And not
rather
the head.
than trying to turning the head to see where you're going. And then
Mhm.
also not looking at at your hands or your movement, because you don't need to have acknowledgement of where they are.
Right.
The hands know where they're supposed to be.
Mhm.
They're all automatically just moving into that position, because you have to allow the body to seek that point of comfort.
Mhm.
So when it's comfortable, it says, okay, I'm there. Now I'm ready to move on to the next position. And you could feel that once you reach a certain movement, you find yourself kind of, you know, there's a feeling of okay, let's move some more. And you just automatically start moving in that direction.
Mhm.
I know sometimes my oldest disciple, Mark, I call him Fujai, um, he would say, well, sometimes I know that Sifu is in a bad mood. I said, how do you know when I'm not in a good mood? He says, because then you'll teach us the form and then you'll stop us at some really awkward position. And he says, okay, that's it for today. It's like we're up in the crane stand, your foot is out like this, you're balancing, and he says, okay, that's it.
Oh, that's cute.
And I would, I I sat back and I thought about it and I said, he's probably right. It's probably very right about that because I remember my teacher is doing the same thing. You know, you reach to a certain position, you're halfway through the movement, and he says, "Okay, that's it," and you stay in that position. It's like that's not a place to end, to stop, because once you stop in that position, you feel and you know in your body and every
You need to release,
parts of
yeah.
you know that there's something else that comes right after it, and it wants to do that something else, but he just stops it right there. You know, it's like water flowing, and all of a sudden you put a stop. It's gonna back up, but it's still it radiates even more force to try to go forward.
Yeah.
And basically, that is the idea behind it. Although it seems, you know, well, he's in a bad mood, and that's why he's bringing me halfway. No, because I want you to get the sense of something coming along, and I want
Okay.
your body and mind to know that there is something else that goes along with it.
Okay.
There's a series of movements, and that applies, and you're only halfway through that movement. Like that last full movement is just one straight movement from that crane position, one straight down, round, come back, the whole thing. It's one straight movement,
Right.
and then it changes directions again, and that's what caused that's what you call the free flowing movements of the dragon. And if you think of it in terms of the dragon, which is the serpent, every time he turns, his tail comes around.
Right.
And
Full
so
circle.
every time you make a movement one way, expect something to counter the other way, and
Uh,
the unwinding of that movement,
okay.
because he coils himself in an effort to have more power to extend himself.
Hmm.
Getting back to what I was trying to tell Linda yesterday, you bring it in and you harvest enough that you could push out even stronger.
Right.
This is the gathering, this is the expanding. In the
Hmm.
gathering, there's only so much energy. In the expanding, there's 10 times more power in the expansion. That's why you coil and then you uncoil.
Hmm.
And that's how the movement takes place naturally. So you don't have to stay there with the sword and try to hack and chop and cut. You let your body movement and the energy move you from one side to the other. And if it's radiating from the hip, even the arm movement, as I said, radiate from the hip, it requires zero effort.
Yeah. Amazing, huh?
Yeah. But if you isolate the movement and say, well, the movement is from the arm, it's going to require effort from the arm and the shoulder and all the muscle.
Right.
You know, it's it's an easier theory to think that if you're going to lift something, to lift it by yourself or to have 10 people lift it with you. If the arm is going to move, it's the same theory. You're moving the arm by itself, it requires more effort. But if the whole body is involved, including the mental aspects as well, then the movement becomes that much
Mhm.
easier.
Okay.
So everything is moved as a group, as one, not something which is independent.
Hmm.
Does that make some sense or some sense of
It
logic?
does. It does make a lot of sense. It's just the the I guess because it's still hard for me to think of the I know I think of the one, but sometimes staying in the one is hard. Not hard. I don't know how to explain it. The concept is inherent. I mean, it inherently makes the most sense, just like the movements. And then realizing that certain movements are less strenuous or whatever when you're using your whole body instead of just my arm or just whatever, or lifting something without like using my legs. I mean, it's like, you know, they tell you constantly that's how you hurt your back, is you're bending over and not, you know, lifting things correctly. And then you realize that probably your whole life, not your whole life, but that during the course of your lifetime, you learn a lot of bad habits, and then trying to break those bad habits and getting back into the correct alignment and the correct movement is weird, because what feels normal to you is not normal. I mean, you need to go back to where things don't hurt, or things, you're right, you develop a tolerance to the pain, or the tolerance to certain things that you don't, that in my mind I know is not right, but you know, you do it anyway. And so trying to get back to feeling more centered, and the whole alignment of my spine is now more important as I get older, I guess. I know it's only going to last me a certain number of more years, and I want to make sure that I kind of keep it, I keep my body in the best it can be for as long as it can be, you know.
You know, it falls back to a concept that most people have, and especially here in America, that most people are trying to exercise. And it's called independence. When you keep on saying, well, I don't need the help, I could do this by myself. You cannot. You need the help of the universe. You need the help of everything else to make it that much easier.
Right.
Because to try to do it by yourself requires too much effort, and eventually will cause harm to you.
Right.
But if it's a group is doing it, then it's easier,
Right.
and less chance of any kind of harm whatsoever. There's a Taoist story that talked about it talks about a man that wanted to, he lived on one side of a hill, and he wanted to be able to get his cattle, his oxen, from one side to the other.
Mm-hmm.
And for years and years, he's trying to figure out exactly what he needs to do to get the oxen through, because there was a valley, but the valley was also filled, you know, it was stuck with stones or other things like that. So he decided that he told his other villagers that what he was going to do, he was going to make a path through the valley. He's going to dig a hole through the valley. He will not be able to succeed, because he doesn't have the tools, he doesn't have anything like that to get through. And his answer to them was that I will start it. My predecessors, people that came after me, will continue, and they'll continue and continue, and eventually we'll be able to get through. But somebody had to be the person who initiates the movement in order for that to happen. Then the group follows and continue on with that to accomplish that. And that's why I say the meaning of independence is not independent, and doesn't mean individual. It means the secondary word would be interdependent.
Right.
And then you strive beyond the interdependent and going back into the one.
Right.
And only the one could sustain itself. The differences and the spreading apart does not hold itself.
Mm-hmm.
You can't hold things if the fingers are spread apart. They could only hold things if they come together to create a palm or a hand. And it's the same way you incorporate with the body in any kind of a movement. But you focus, like I said, not just on the physical part, it's everything else that goes along with it.
Mhm.
The mental, the spiritual, the thought, everything else that goes into it to make it whole, to create that movement. So in order to move my hand, it's not just a physical thing. There's thought to actions, action to movement, feelings and other things that goes along with it, along with memory of what I thought I've done before. You know,
Mhm.
I've moved my hand that way before, so therefore I'm going to try to move it again. But knowing that I can't move my hand exactly the way I've moved it before, I could only move it again for the first time. So in learning the sword, we had to sit down and listen to lecture like this when my teacher was talking. But then he would often tell us, he says, you need to forget about everything that I said. He says, now go on and practice. And you literally thought about it for a while, and it's just okay. And then you go and start practicing. But eventually your movement starts becomes very easy,
Mhm.
uninterrupted. Because you're no longer thinking about the parts of that movement. You look at the movement as something which is complete within itself. So therefore, it's no longer the part. So when you pick up the sword, don't think, okay, now I have the sword in my hand, I need to do something. No. Now you have now you have the sword in your hand. The sword has always been in your hand.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Then the other portion is how the sword is created. What are the features of the sword? How is it being used?
Mhm.
You know, you're going to bend light, you're going to cut air, you're going to do a lot of things with it, but you have to do it with what we call the perpetual dance. So it's the dancing is the breath and the movement and the mind and the spirit all acting as one, allowing that sword to move in each direction. A good, uh, an average swordsman will think about how he moves. A Taoist swordsman has no thought and no idea of how he moves. He just moves. A person who's a good, an average chef will change his knife, say every 3 or 4 months. A good chef would change his knife, sharpen his knife maybe once or twice a week. A Taoist chef never have to sharpen his knife at all because once an edge is made, that edge is kept that way. In sharpening a knife, what happened with the blade is not that the knife itself gets dull, it's the blade itself, the tip begins to bend one way or the other, depending on where you're putting the accent
Um,
of the blade.
oh,
So
okay.
the blade doesn't get blunted like this because you didn't do anything to blunt it. What you're doing is pressing everything. A
Okay.
Taoist will find the natural pathway through the meat or the vegetables and follow those grains. So therefore, it actually enhances the sharpness of the blade.
Oh, wow.
Instead of trying to hack across the blade and putting effort and bending the blade. So each time when you say sharpening, he has to straighten the blade back again in position.
Right. Oh, okay.
So in an effort to use the sword or use the form, you use the same method. You do not try to force a movement or hack a movement into it. You try to find the natural path of how that movement is going to go, how your body is going to perceive and follow that movement. That's why a teacher can only take you so far, but you have the mechanism to move
Right.
that body.
Right.
The teacher has the ability to be the spectator and look outside and watch and see how it's being moved. But they can't tell you how to move it because you know exactly where the adjustments should be at any point in time because you're living inside that body.
Right.
So they could give you like a wide blueprint of an idea, but they don't hand you a box and say, I want you to think in the box or think outside the box. They don't give you a box at all. So they allow you to find your own way.
Mhm. Okay. Is there a difference in teaching women and men as far as their mental um, aspect of Tai Chi for you? I mean, is it different? It's the same.
Um, Actually, I'm going to answer the question in two parts, and partially like a politician. You like that answer?
I do like that answer. That's very good. You're diplomatic about it.
Um, with a woman, um, they have a natural ability of letting go and allowing, where most men try to control,
Right.
very forcibly trying to control. And with most men, you have to teach them a way and let them feel safe enough that they could let go and let something happen.
Mhm.
With most women, they're more trusting to make something happen, and they're more inclined to want to be able to feel it, other than to control it, other than to do anything else. Well, a male will try to, in most cases, would want to control it, other
Mhm.
than feel it.
Okay.
The women wants to feel it, men wants to control
Feel
it.
it. Mhm. Okay. Hmm.
That's why they
Interesting.
say, um, you know, you you know the path of a man, but keep the wisdom of a woman. That's why in society, and you think of it this way, in society, and the clan that I'm from were matriarchic.
Right.
Matriarchic clans are usually much better organized, easily run, less conflicts to zero conflicts.
Mhm.
A clan which is maternal usually have a lot more conflicts and less harder to run because there's not a cohesiveness in understanding, and there's not a gentleness or a compassion that goes along with it. There was more need to control. But the other part of my answer is that it's a learned behavior in a matriarchic society. In a patriotic in a female society, a matriarchic society, it's an adapted behavior because it's the
Mhm.
way that you naturally are. You don't have to learn to be that way. A male child that is brought up with women would often be a lot more compassionate, a lot softer, a lot more understanding, and will deal with a woman in a much different way than a man that was brought up more with a dominating father or male figure in their life. They intend to
Right.
be a little bit harder and stronger. And
Right.
when you find one that goes somewhere in between where there's a balance, then you find somebody who walks the path a little bit easier. So
Mhm.
in order to teach, and this may seem kind of strange, but in order to teach male and female, you don't think of it in terms of male and female because sometimes the male have the quality that you think the female will have, and the female has the quality that the male
Right.
will have. So when
Yeah.
they come into the classroom in order to learn, you have to try to figure which is the dominant, which appears to be more the dominant. And
Mhm.
then that's what you need to work with. So you don't think of it in terms of male and female. You think in
Right.
terms of what attributes they're bringing in, and how they're gonna learn it. Because
Right.
one of the things I found really strange about teaching is that majority of the male that I teach, most of, most of them are some side of kind of an engineer,
Mhm.
you know, which is strange, but not strange because they deal most with mathematics and physics, but they're the most willing people to let go and to see something else,
Mhm.
other than someone who comes from another kind of a background, which is harder for them to seems to be harder for them to do it.
Oh, wow. Huh.
So most of the male in my class, they're all either electrical engineer, computer engineers, or whatever else. Majority of them are engineer, construction engineers, and those guys usually stay with it and stick with it the longest. The rest of the others have a really harder time, and they'll go from one school to the other, but
Uh-huh.
they never stay with it that long. The dedication is a little bit seems to be a little bit harder. I've
Right.
never tried it. I've never figured out why that happened
Uh-huh. I don't know.
because in my own theory, I think because most people like that have a different gentleness, compassion, but also a willingness to see what is not there.
Mhm.
You know, because in terms of mathematics and physics, you have to be able to think that way.
Right.
And if you think that way, usually you're going to act and be that way in just about everything that you do, either consciously or subconsciously. You're going to be that way anyway.
Mhm.
So it makes it a lot easier. So to answer your questions, no, there's no difference in teaching one or the other.
Uh-huh.
It's just a matter of what they bring with them and what you need to work with. Some you need to harden, some you need to soften, some you need to make pliable that they could use.
Uh-huh.
The not challenge, but the things that I see that is is the lack of knowledge or not being in touch with their own self, that a lot of people live outside themselves, so they have no concept of the physical body that they have, and that makes it harder to get the internal and the spiritual body as part of it as well, because
Mhm.
sometimes you'll tell someone to move your arm this way, and they kind of look at it and they try to move it, and it's like eye hand coordination trying to figure out what's going on, and once they
Oh,
have to
yeah.
do that,
Okay.
that there's a disconnection, and also stiffening in a joint. When the hand goes out like this, they instantly lock it and the shoulder goes up. And I'm thinking, oh, that's gotta hurt. Because, you're tightening all of this, and then, plus it's a
Yeah.
lot of work. You know, I'm not gonna do that. I said, drop it, make it easy. You know, I could close my hand like this a lot of times and it's gonna hurt. But if I do
Right.
like this, it doesn't.
Yeah.
If I simply just take the tension out of the arm and let it fall, it
Yeah.
closes.
Does it?
So
Yeah.
I'm gonna find the easiest way to do it, but the the way that's gonna sustain it the longest.
Mhm. Right.
So it's not a challenge of trying to understand yourself or understand your movement, because if you try to do that, that's going to take a lifetime.
Right.
You still won't understand it. So the idea is to be surprised, and I think I told you before, every time something is done, be surprised. Everything is an awe.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Right.
That's why I told my student, it says, you know, this may sound a little bit religious, but it's not. I said, you were given, when you were born, you were given two little bags, and one has we and the other one has ah. I said, and you were told that you're not allowed to come back unless you use those two up. Most people try to go back with a bunch of we's and ahs because in their whole lifetimes, how many times do you go wee, or ah, really enjoy something, you know? Most people spend time struggling and holding on so tightly. The we's and ahs are rarely used.
Right.
I was telling that to a group before, and one person got up and said, "I bet you had to go back several times to get a bag filled." I said, "Yeah." He was exhausted. He said, "You used up so much of it because you're always going wee or ah." But the idea is to know yourself from the inside more holistically. The way you think, the uncontrollable thoughts, and allow that and let it happen. The
Yeah.
movements in the body, let it happen. Follow it. See where it's gonna go.
Okay.
And that would allow you free movements and free flowing thoughts. And you'll notice that the frustration and level would begin to reduce itself.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
you get less, you'll find times that you'll get less frustrated over things, that it doesn't really matter because you realize in 10 years, does it really matter anyway? You think about, when you were younger, the things that you were so worried about, and oh, I got to do this, you know,
Yeah,
here it is 10, 20 years after you go, what was that all about? It didn't change my life. There was no earth-shattering thing that happened.
exactly.
It didn't make a difference. But yes, at that time, I was just so worried and so concerned and feel that I had to control these things and put it back into order.
Right.
It's like if you get in a conversation with someone or a debate, if you get in a debate with someone, and as a youngster, you're thinking, it's so important for me to win this argument. So you want to argue, and go to the point. It's like, why bother? If they feel like they're winning it, good for them.
Yeah, right.
You walk away with whatever you have. You don't feel that
Mhm.
everything in life is a challenge.
Right.
So it makes a heck of a difference.